Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 patch 2.6.1 Season 15 video guide on the best builds. We'll take a look at the 10 best builds that you can run for solo Greater Rift pushing. And we'll also revisit our tier list, which groups the top 40 builds and sorts them according to their relative strength. Now, the last time we updated this tier list was in Season 13, 2 seasons ago, and we haven't had a balance patch since Season 12. So Season 15's tier list remains mostly the same, but there were a couple of surprises that have made me make some minor revisions to the tier list. Now, if you only came here to see which are the 10 best builds in this game, as well as which classes have the best starter sets for Season 15, then you can skip ahead to the time indicated above. But I encourage you to stick around for the full analysis. And in the description below, you'll find a link to each of the 40 builds on this list if you want to know how to run them. Now, in this video, rather than give a full rundown of all 40 builds on this list, we're going to mostly look at what has changed since Season 13's tier list. I'll assume that you've already seen the Season 13 video in which we cover every single build, and if you haven't, it's linked in the video description. So we're going to compare our previous tier list with our new tier list. Is it the other way around? So let's start by comparing the F tiers. F as in... Whew, these builds are falling behind. The first change you'll notice is that we have revised what it means to be F tier. Rather than be roughly 15 Greater Rift levels behind our top builds, these are now roughly 18 Greater Rift levels behind. And this is simply a reflection on the best builds pushing further than expected. So rather than kick some builds off the tier list entirely, we are widening our range of what we consider to be viable builds. Because all these builds still deserve the title viable. And 3 builds from last tier list's D tier are joining our revised F tier, being the Legacy of Nightmares Spirit Barrage Witch Doctor, the Invoker Crusader, and the Heaven's Fury Crusader, with that last one actually being a fairly good Rift Guardian killer in 4-man groups. Now, we must stress that these builds are not any worse than they previously were. Again, there was no balance changes, but they just more closely match our new definition of F tier than they match our new definition of D tier. Speaking of which, let's give you folks the D tier. D as in, don't discount these builds, although there are plenty of better builds. We have far more builds in the D tier this season, which is now redefined as being roughly 15 Greater Rift levels behind the top tier rather than roughly 12 Greater Rift levels from our previous tier list. These builds are on average roughly 3 Greater Rift levels more powerful than the average F tier build. And most of the movement that we're seeing here is simply due to the top builds pushing everything else down. However, there is one meaningful difference: the Inarius Necromancer. This build has risen from the F tier, even accounting for the top builds setting an even higher standard than expected. While Inarius is still the weakest of the 4 Necromancer sets, the Inarius Thorns build has proven to be more powerful than expected. It's just really rare to see anyone pushing with Inarius, since it's far outclassed by the Corpse Lance Necromancer builds. So let's move into the C tier. C as in, can you get any more mediocre than this? The C tier roughly defines the average power of the 40 builds on this list, which again represent the best builds in the game, so being average or the best is still pretty damn good. C tier's definition remains roughly the same. Rather than being roughly 10 Greater Rift levels behind S tier, it's now roughly 11 Greater Rift levels behind, which is about 4 Greater Rift levels stronger than the D tier builds on average. And we see 2 surprises in C tier. First off, the Sun Wukong Lashing Tail Kick Monk has proven to be stronger than anticipated, rising from the D tier. But given it pales in comparison to the similar Sun Wukong Wave of Light build, since it's just pure mathematically outclassed, few people are willing to push with Sun Wukong LTK, but it's made its way up there. The other surprise is a new addition to the tier list: the Vir Lightning Wizard. This is the most powerful Greater Rift pushing variant of the Lightning Wizard, which we have listed here as the Tal Vir Archon from the previous tier. Vir Lightning rose to becoming the most powerful Lightning Wizard thanks to the Vir buff of patch 261, but it plays significantly differently from the traditional Lightning Wizard because it's a reverse Archon build. In other words, you're using Archon simply to accumulate buffs and are actually doing your damage while outside of Archon. However, this build relies on triggering the mantled heal effect while operating at relatively low attack speed, which makes this build highly reliant on luck. So it's very rare to see people pushing with this build, particularly because there are far more powerful wizard builds. So next, let's look at the B tier. B as in best some classes have to offer. Our definition of B tier remains roughly the same. It's roughly 8 Greater Rift levels behind S tier rather than 7, which was from last tier list. And these builds are still on average about 3 Greater Rift levels stronger than the average C tier build. Do bear in mind though that the bottom build of B tier is going to be closer in power to the top build of C tier than to the top build of B tier. There are seldom very hard distinctions between our tiers, but we have to draw the line somewhere. So from here we can actually move into our top 10 builds. Starting with number 10, the Vir Frozen Orb Wizard. This is a reverse Archon build that uses its time in Archon to build buff stacks, to scout, to group enemies, before unleashing some massive, damaging frozen orbs when it pops out of Archon. Now this build has dropped from 7th place on our previous tier list because other builds have squeezed ahead of it. And there are stronger and less clunky wizard builds out there. On to number 9, the Unhallowed Essence Multi-Shot Demon Hunter. Yes, that's right, the Demon Hunter has managed to place on the top 10 list. While the Demon Hunter has many viable builds of roughly equal power available to it, Unhallowed Essence Multi-Shot is just slightly ahead of the others. And we've got a build guide on an Unhallowed Essence Multi-Shot Demon Hunter right here. And for anyone wondering about the Marauder Multi-Shot build that was topping the leaderboard at some point, Marauder Multi-Shot is a good speed build, but the strongest Marauder build is cluster arrow based. Marauder Multi-Shot was only topping the leaderboards due to a snapshotting exploit, which has since been patched. EU Multi-Shot is definitely, no doubt, stronger than Marauder Multi-Shot. On to number 8, the Charge Barbarian. Down from number 5 from our previous tier list, this Recramorcen Barbarian may be the best Barbarian build for speedruns, but for Greater Rift pushing has proven to be outclassed by another Recramorcen Barbarian build. And we've got a build guide right here. On to number 7, the Trag'Oul Corpse Lance Necromancer. This build remains incredibly strong, but from a pure DPS standpoint, it is slightly beat by another Corpse Lance Necromancer build, which we'll get to soon. Still, if you'd like to run this version, we've got a build guide right here. On to number 6, Sun Wukong Wave of Light. This build has risen from number 9 on our previous top 10 list, and it's just proven to be a bit stronger than expected. And we're talking about both versions of this build. There's one version that uses Focus and Restraint and a generator. It involves engaging into melee before retreating back to deal your damage. And the other version is generatorless. It uses Epiphany and tries to stay at range at all times, going for a lot more cooldown. And both of these builds are roughly equally viable. They're just different playstyles. One could argue that one is more reliant on skill and the other is more reliant on gear. Regardless, the Sun Wukong Wave of Light Monk is the best monk build, and we've got a build guide over here. That takes us to the A tier. A as in outstanding. We're redefining the A tier to be roughly 4 Greater Rift levels behind S tier, which makes them on average 4 Greater Rift levels stronger than the average B tier build. And as we get to number 5 of our top 10 list, we find another surprise. The DMO Frozen Orb Wizard has exceeded expectations, jumping ahead from number 10 from our previous top 10 list. Perhaps with DMO being the starter set for Season 14, people were more willing to push it to its limits. Still, it isn't the best wizard build. On to number 4, the Hammer of the Ancients Recramorcen Barbarian. Up from number 6, it pushed a little further than we expected, as we saw people move from Charge Barb over to Hota Recramorcen. This is the best Barbarian build, and we've got a build guide for it right here. On to number 3, the Pestilence Corpse Lance build. This build holds its position at number 3. It is the best Necromancer build, and it scales a little better than the Trag'Oul Corpse Lance build because we're using the Cold Rune on Corpse Lance, which stacks crit chance. And this build also makes for a really good Rift Guardian killer in groups. We've got a build guide right here. And that takes us to the S tier. S as in stupidly powerful. And on to number 2 on our top 10 list, we have the Firebird Star Pact Arcane Meteor Wizard. That's a lot of words. Now, in our last tier list, we kept this build in the A tier. However, a variant has emerged that is arguably even more powerful than the number 1 build on this list. However, it is incredibly difficult to pull off. This new variant works in the skill Wave of Force Arcane Attunement into the build, which lets you gain 4% damage per enemy hit on your next Arcane Meteor. With the right usage, this scales to an enormous amount of damage, and this adds an additional level of complexity to an already difficult to master build. The regular, non-Wave of Force version of this build would still be classified as A tier, and this, in both forms, is the most powerful wizard build. I will, however, mention quickly that on console, the most powerful wizard build is the Twister Wizard. In the past, years ago, this was also the most powerful wizard build on PC, but it was nerfed on PC and only on PC, which has allowed it to become the top build arguably in the entire game on console. And lastly, coming in at number 1, surprise surprise, the Condemn Crusader. This is perhaps the most popular build to push the leaderboards with, and it's easy to see why. It's relatively simple to run, and it is by far the most powerful Crusader build, and just a super powerful build altogether. We've got a build guide for it right here. Now that covers our top builds of the season. However, we'll also go over what are the best starter classes. This is based on the starter sets that we're anticipating for Season 15. So, our number 1, probably best starter class, in my opinion, would be the Demon Hunter, because you're getting the Unhallowed Essence set. As we stated, Unhallowed Essence allows you to move into the strongest Demon Hunter build for solo Greater Rift pushing, which also happens to be one of, if not the, best speed build in the game. So whether you're pushing GRs or speed farming, Unhallowed Essence is going to be what you want, so this is an excellent starter class for Season 15. Next, we got the Necromancer, who has the Rothma set. Now, Rothma is a B tier build for solo Greater Rift pushing, but for the group meta, for speedruns, it is mandatory. There are rat runs in this game. That is what everyone does to farm up Paragon really quickly. And it consists of having 2 Rothma DPS Necromancers, a support Necromancer, and a support Barbarian. This is proven to be the most efficient XP farming setup in the game. And also, Rothma has a pretty decent solo speed farming build. So overall, this is a great starter class. Next, we've got Wizard with the Talrasha set. Now, Talrasha is very good for pushing, particularly early in the season before Firebird takes over. That's what you tend to see. Start of the season, Talrasha is topping the Wizard leaderboards, but then Firebird takes over. And Talrasha channeling Meteor build is a C tier build, but it does allow you to transition to the best wizard build. There are some shared items there, and there are some excellent speedrunning builds with Talrasha. So overall, wizard is a very good starter class. On to the Witch Doctor that gets the Helltooth set. Now, Helltooth is C tier for Greater Rift pushing. You've got the Helltooth Firebats build, and you also have the Helltooth Gargantuan build in D tier. But then for speedrunning, you've got the Chicken Dock, which is one of the best speedrunning builds in the game. So overall, Witch Doctor is a pretty good starter class. Onto the Barbarian that gets Wrath of the Wastes. That's the Whirlwind Barb. And we've got Whirlwind for GR pushing as a B tier build, and for speed, it's pretty good as well. So overall, this is a decent starter, although to scale Whirlwind does require a little bit more finessing in your gear, but it's certainly not the worst starter class you can get. Onto Crusader that gets the Roland set. Now we've got the Sweepsader, that's a C tier build, and with Rolands you can build a not so great speed build, so overall the Crusader does not get a very good start for Season 15. However, there is one class that gets an absolutely abysmal start, and that would be the Monk with the Raiment set. Now, the Raiment Duo Generator build is F tier. It is clinging to the tier list, just barely. And in the past, there was, I think, a build called the One Punch Monk that was excellent at T10 farming with just pure dash, dash, dash. Infinite Dash Monk might be another term for it. It just does not scale to T13. It cannot bring the damage. So to get a speed build for T13, you really gotta cobble together something that can barely survive, and overall, it's just a terrible starter set. So by far, in my opinion, Monk gets the worst start for Season 15. And that's gonna wrap up this video. As a reminder, we got links in the video description to all the builds that we've spoken about, all the 40 builds on the list. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider becoming a Royal Raider on Patreon, where your support is immensely appreciated. We've got a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.